Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, August the 27th, 2025. Today is the 34th anniversary of Moldova's declaration of independence. And, Moldova is a European country. It used to be part of the Soviet Union. It wants to be a member of the European Union. And it's in the news, quite a lot, and it's got a very pro-European president, Maia Sangu, and so she is, I believe, she's a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government, and she's been an advisor to the World Bank. It's a sort of standard resume for people like that. So she could say that she's a bit of a plant of the Western order, the Western world, advocating for a particular set of policies to be part of particular alliances. So I think it would be a good idea to look at her horoscope, even though I don't have her time of birth. But before I look at Moldova and Maia Sangu, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, August the 27th, 2025. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time, and the moon is still in Libra at noon, at 25 Libra. So we've got quite a lot of air here. I mean, planets and air signs. We've got the moon and the Mars. And additionally, we've got Uranus and Pluto. As always, Uranus and Pluto. But the moon is getting close to leaving the sign, and tomorrow morning, London time, the moon does go into Scorpio. So that's Thursday, and so if you're in the Americas, then the moon will go into Scorpio, this evening. So it is, a bit of a changeover there. And the moon is most certainly in the Via Combusta. So, today may not be entirely stable. Although the moon is void, the moon has made its last aspect before leaving the sign. Well, that does to an extent depend on your time zone, but the moon, perhaps at the beginning of the day, makes a sextile to Mercury, but that moon sextile Mercury, that is the last major aspect the moon makes before moving into Scorpio. And aside from that, we have, the moon makes an opposition to Chiron. And so, as there aren't many lunar aspects around, we probably have to place some emphasis on that. And moon in Libra opposition Chiron in Aries. Moon in Libra likes everything to be sort of balanced, if we're quite literal about what Libra actually means. So moon in Libra is looking for balance, and its opposition Chiron, and Chiron, can be the maverick. However hard you want things to go to plan, you might decide that something has to be done, something has to be said. And, Chiron very often does want attention, particularly if it is in Aries. And while this is going on, Venus is moving towards an opposition of Pluto. So there is Venus at 2 degrees Leo, Pluto at 2 degrees Aquarius. So Venus opposition Pluto, is that an aspect we need to be concerned about? Well, in many cases, it's just going to pass and we won't notice it. But as far as relationships are concerned, when you think about Venus opposition Pluto, you think of something quite intense. Venus is in Leo. Venus wants attention. Venus wants to be noticed. And perhaps if Venus doesn't get noticed, it gets upset. Opposition Pluto gets angry. Now, that Venus opposition Pluto might be about feelings that aren't expressed. They're there if one is sensitive enough to see them, but other people's annoyances may not be entirely obvious. So perhaps that Venus opposition Pluto requires real sensitivity to understand what is going on, and understand what people are thinking, what people are feeling, what people are worrying about. And yes, you could say that Venus in Leo opposition Pluto is representative of someone who wants attention but can't get attention because Pluto can hide things. So that is a way in which Venus opposition Pluto could work. Venus is also a planet relating to money, and so with Venus opposition Pluto, some of us might get concerned about money and be worrying about, who has the money? Are we owed money? Do we owe someone else money? And so there might be thoughts about finances. But really, aside from that, there is not a huge amount going on today. And so, I know that I put out a video every day and I try to come up with something new. But, sometimes there isn't really a great deal to be said. And as far as the picture in Australia and New Zealand is concerned, here's the picture for Sydney, Australia, noon in Sydney, and you can just see the moon is at 18 degrees Libra. Now that moon at 18 degrees Libra, is relatively close to Mars. So yesterday, Tuesday, I talked about the fact that there was a conjunction between the moon and Mars, and this conjunction, if you're in the Americas or in Europe, you may feel that it's passing. That some of the anger associated with that Moon-Mars conjunction is sort of moving into the distance. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it just may be more real. It may be sort of more current. You may be able to really sort of feel something there, something annoying. But I don't think it's going to be of huge significance. So, if you are in Australia and New Zealand, well, it's not just the moon conjunct Mars, moon sextile Mercury. Now, that moon sextile Mercury is exact in Australia and New Zealand. So, in the middle of the day, when everything is going on. And so, moon sextile Mercury, it's a great aspect. It allows you to say things and be able to, tell people what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And so, make the most of it. And because, in other parts of the world, in America, for example, I don't think you're going to feel that moon sextile Mercury as powerfully as you would do in Australasia. And then there is the heliocentric picture, where, of course, we put the sun at the center of the solar system. So here's the chart, and Mars is starting to make a trine to Jupiter. So geocentrically, we have got Mars in Libra starting to make a square to Jupiter in Cancer. Heliocentrically, it's a trine. So there is a Mars-Jupiter feel to the next few days, the next week, however long it takes for those two Mars-Jupiter aspects to become exact. The square geocentrically, the trine heliocentrically, and Mars and Jupiter are a high energy pair. And this may say, what's happening around us, what's happening in the world, and perhaps things are getting more active. So that's one thing that we do need to think about. Additionally, we still have a conjunction between Mercury and Venus. It's now 5 degrees apart, but I think it may still be something that we can take advantage of. As I was saying yesterday, Mercury-Venus conjunctions heliocentrically or geocentrically as well can be very creative. They can allow us to show the world what we can do. They can be about artistic endeavor. And so if you've got something to offer with that Mercury sextile Venus, then feel free. Don't hold back. And going back to the Mars Jupiter trine, a reminder that we are moving towards a grand trine. So the Earth is starting to make a trine to Mars. The Earth is starting to make a trine to Jupiter. So that seems quite fortunate on the surface. But, we should remember that this is heliocentric astrology, and when you see planets in aspect, even if it's a fortunate aspect, you should just see it just as a connection. And Mars Jupiter is high energy, and if there's a lot of energy around, is that necessarily a good thing? Well, no. Mars Jupiter trines can be problematic, because they can encourage people to basically expend too much energy and throw it into the wrong areas. And so Earth moving towards this grand trine may not necessarily be a good thing, but on a positive note, this grand trine may encourage us to make the most of what we've got, make the most of the energy we have at our disposal. So that's a heliocentric picture. I do think that things are happening, and that the next few days there should be a higher level of activity. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, kind of depends. So that's the heliocentric picture, and now I want to consider the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. Aries, you have the moon still in Libra, which is your opposite sign. And so when you've got moon in Libra, there is this noise, I'm afraid. I don't know what it is. It's like a car at really close proximity. So, my apologies. I can't do anything about it. So the moon is in late Libra. Moon is, at the end of, your opposite sign. And so with moon in this position, relationships could be of continued importance, in the sense that you might find yourself paying more attention than usual to what another person is doing, or and you might feel that your freedom of action is being impinged upon, but it might be in your head, it might be your imagination. And so don't necessarily assume that anyone out there is actively trying to restrict your freedom of action, because I don't think they are. And additionally, the moon is making an opposition to Chiron. So moon opposition Chiron across the main axis of your chart. It could be about someone wanting attention, feeling they have to be taken seriously. And the question is, how seriously do you take them? And I think that there could be an optionality to it. Optional because you don't necessarily have to take someone seriously or give them the attention they're craving. You can if you want, but I don't think that you actually have to. And that doesn't mean to say that you are unpleasant or antisocial. In fact, Aries, if you want to be nice to people, you certainly can be. And there's something about you that's very sort of optimistic and enthusiastic, again, if you want to be. And you can make people feel good about themselves, and you can get people to trust you. And I think that is perhaps a key point in the way sort of the moon in Libra, in your opposite sign, it's not all bad, and it's not all about you losing control. It can be about you gaining people's confidence. So there is definitely a positive side to that. Overall, Aries, I think that there is a focus on relationships, on other people, and what other people are doing. And if you happen to be alone, or you're not interacting with other people, what would that mean? Well, I think that you are still going to be aware that you cannot be working in isolation. That whatever you're doing, you have to take into account other things other factors that you don't necessarily want to deal with. You'd rather do things on your own. But if you do try to do things completely on your own, you try to seal yourself off from the outside world, then it might not be satisfactory. Perhaps you're not getting the support you need. Perhaps you're not getting the information you need. But you do have to take into account what is happening around you. Now, there could be a change this evening if you're in the Americas, because this evening the moon does move out of Libra and it moves into Scorpio. Again, this is about the Americas, and so with that change, you can maybe be more self-sufficient. And I think late in the day in the Americas, you could start to become sort of more emotional and more secretive. And if you're in other parts of the world, you're not going to get Moon and Scorpio until tomorrow. But I'll be talking about that when I do my horoscopes for Thursday. Taurus. There is an opposition between Venus and Pluto, and this Venus opposition Pluto is likely to have some effect on you. I mean, after all, Venus is your ruler, and it's opposition Pluto. So there could be some things that you are taking seriously. You regard them as being very important, and you don't want to let go of them. And also with Venus opposition Pluto, there is a question of whether or not you are silenced. And Pluto in astrology is a difficult energy to pin down, because Pluto can make things stronger and more intense, but it can also drive things into the shadows, because Pluto is a very hidden thing. And so with Venus opposition Pluto, some Taurians might respond to that Venus-Pluto energy by wanting to sort of shrink into the shadows. You don't want to be noticed. If you've got thoughts or feelings, you're going to want to keep them to yourself. If you let other people know about them, then you might feel compromised. So is it worth keeping it to yourself? Sometimes you might find yourself just being secretive just for the sake of it, and there might not be a point. And indeed, it's possible that some things do have to be revealed. And there are other ways of looking at Venus opposition Pluto. Venus opposition Pluto might be a challenge. With Venus in Leo, Taurus, part of you does want to keep yourself to yourself. You, in many cases, are going to appreciate the privacy of your own home. And then Pluto opposition Venus is challenging that, saying, well, hold on, you can't keep everything to yourself. You might like to shut yourself away from the outside world, but you can't. There are other things you have to take into account, and you might not be willing to interact with the outside world. It's too complicated, it's too dangerous, or it might seem that way, but I don't think it actually is. I think if you give people a chance to explain themselves, and it may not just be people, it may be organizations, and whoever is trying to get your attention, then you'll realize that there is something you have to do. And Pluto is about power, and it is about your power in the end. It might not feel like it. It might feel that it's like some unwelcome force trying to get you to do things against your will, but it just might be you, and you having to, accept your responsibility. And so that might be how Venus opposition Pluto works. But as far as keeping things hidden and being intense, when one thinks with Pluto, one thinks about intensity, one thinks about possessiveness, and one thinks about obsession. So that might say something about what is important to you. You might become obsessed. You might regard, one particular thing as being incredibly important. You've got to give it everything you've got, and in the process, you could take things too seriously. And on a different note, the moon is in late Libra, and it's getting ready to move into Scorpio. In fact, this evening, if you're in the Americas, it does move into Scorpio. And that might say something about relationships and how you relate to other people when the moon moves into Scorpio. But I'll be talking more about that tomorrow when I do my video for Thursday. But with moon in late Libra, it perhaps is a time to ground yourself. Venus opposition Pluto can just be a little bit too intense, and you can take things too seriously. And moon in Libra is just asking you to just look at how things are in reality. What needs to be done in the here and now, and perhaps by keeping things as simple as possible and just addressing yourself to everyday tasks and what you need to do, then that might be the best way of handling today and its various challenges. Gemini. We still have the moon in Libra. I regard the moon in Libra as being, fairly fortunate for Geminis, because the moon is in an air sign. It's in a very creative part of your chart, and what makes the moon in Libra extra creative is the fact that it's making a sextile to Mercury. Now, this sextile to Mercury is probably going to be strongest if you're in Australia or New Zealand, because that's where it's sort of exact in the middle of the day. If you're in Europe, and particularly in the Americas, the influence of that moon sextile Mercury may be starting to fade, but it's still there. And perhaps if you're in the Americas, you're just going to have to try harder to utilize that moon sextile Mercury. And Mercury is your ruler. So moon sextile Mercury does allow you, wherever you are, to be extra creative, and to be able to tell people about your creativity and what you're doing. And don't forget that in the heliocentric chart, we've got Venus conjunct Mercury, and Venus conjunct Mercury is a very creative conjunction that allows you to sort of show what you can do, and people will, I think, be interested. So Gemini, it's very important that you are sort of open and honest, and also that you're in control. And you might realize that if you want to make the most of everything, you do need some space. You can't have people cluttering you up, and there's a limit to how close you're going to want to get to anyone. And so if there are people around you, you're aware of them, but you're also aware of their limitations, and you can only get so close to them. If you get too close to them, they could cramp your style. And in fact, if you do put a lot of energy into relationships, whatever those relationships are, you might in the end be disappointed. People just can't fully deliver. And so perhaps you should just accept the situation. And besides, it is a time to be thinking about what you can do, and other people are perhaps an optional extra. Cancer. The moon starts today in Libra. It does eventually move into Scorpio. I mean, this evening it will be in Scorpio if you're in the Americas. And, this part of the sky the moon is in, sort of late Libra or even early Scorpio, is, of course, the Via Combusta. So, when you've got the moon in the Via Combusta, it can be a time when things happen that you maybe hadn't fully anticipated. So Cancer, it's probably not a good idea to make concrete plans. You might like to, and you're looking for things to be straightforward, and you want to be in control. So it might be a good idea, or might seem to be a good idea, to make concrete plans. But I'm not convinced that that is necessarily a good idea, because you might have to accept the possibility that there might be change, and a change that you hadn't planned for, and you have to adjust to changing circumstances. And if you've created a situation where you're only going to do one thing, and you've decided all the details, then you might have to start from scratch. And so be as flexible as possible. And the moon, while it's moving through late Libra, it does make a sextile to Mercury, and I think that sextile to Mercury is going to help you to decide what is important. And you can do useful work with money if money matters to you, and you can certainly talk about money, and you can understand money, and you can also understand, for example, how much money you need, what money is required, and what changes you need to make if you're going to get the books to balance. And probably with this moon sextile Mercury, it's okay to dig your heels in. There might be pressure to do something with money or to spend money, but with this moon sextile Mercury, I think that you're going to be able to sort of dig in, and I think you're going to make it clear to other people, what is acceptable and what is not. Now, the moon, although it's in the Via Combusta, it does make that sextile to Mercury, but then it doesn't really make any aspects except for an opposition to Chiron. So you could say that the moon is void; it's not going anywhere. And there may be moments in a day where you feel that really nothing is happening except this opposition to Chiron. And you might feel sort of listless, and you feel that something should be happening, but it's not happening. And so, what do? Well, you could just wait it out, because, if you're in the Americas this evening, or tomorrow, if you're not, the moon will go into Scorpio, and then you sort of get a much more sort of active situation for yourself. But with the moon opposition Chiron, some Cancerians might just feel that they have to say something, they have to do something. Chiron is in Aries. Chiron, wants to get noticed, wants you to get noticed. And it's kind of telling you, well, you have got something original to offer. People might not be able to handle it, but there's something you could say, there's something you could do. It could give everyone pause for thought, and it may even be an obligation. So perhaps, Cancer, there's something you need to do, something you need to say, and it could be disruptive. And you probably don't want to cause disruption, but then something is getting at you, something you're feeling that you have to do something. And so, well, it's up to you. But maybe you have no choice. You have to say something or do something, and take the risk. Leo. At the moment, Leo, you are pretty sociable. Like yesterday, I think yesterday you were on good form socially, and you were able to get people's attention, and you were able to also get people onto your side. And so don't feel that other people can't be there for you. They can be. And so if you make a special effort to talk to them, be nice to them, then you're going to be rewarded, I think. And if anyone has got a bit distant from you, you felt they were you felt there was a growing distance, well, you can start to get close to them in a natural way. There's nothing that has to be forced, And additionally, we have a sextile between the Moon and Mercury, a sextile which is especially strong in Australasia, but in other parts of the world, I think you're still going to be able to utilize that sextile between Moon and Mercury. I mean, after all, Mercury continues to be in Leo, your sign, and so Moon sextile Mercury allows you to be open and very free in terms of what you say, but also being fairly sensitive. You know what people can deal with, you know what they can handle, and so Moon sextile Mercury will probably be able to get the balance right. And if there is anything to say, Leo, then do say it. Don't think that you can't be bothered, or it's not the right time, you'll wait until tomorrow. Well, if you wait until tomorrow, things could change, because the moon is changing sign. This evening, if you're in the Americas, the moon moves out of Libra and into Scorpio, and so moon in Scorpio is it's a very different energy than Libra, and with the moon in Scorpio, you might find that you're not so keen to be open and free, and there are things you want to keep to yourself, and so that is a good reason for getting it all out of the way today, and not waiting too long. But Moon in Scorpio has its own advantages, and if you are in the Americas this evening with the Moon in Scorpio, you can perhaps consider what is important to you, and perhaps your family as well. And so if you're at home with your family this evening, then there might be things that can be sorted out, and at the same time your feelings are going to become sort of quite strong. You don't want your feelings to become too strong. I mean, Moon in Scorpio, the moon is in a fixed sign in Scorpio, and sometimes Moon in Scorpio doesn't want to let go, and it just may be that today, this evening and into tomorrow, then you just you don't want to give away too much. It might be better if you could be more open, but maybe you're just not going to be in the mood, and that reinforces the point that today, if you've got something to say, if you've got someone to talk to, if there's someone you want to introduce yourself to, then do it now, and don't wait too long. Virgo. The moon is making a sextile to Mercury, and it's a gentle aspect, and I think that it's an aspect that you can take advantage of. I mean, it allows you to be a relatively sympathetic character. You can understand what people are trying to say, and you are prepared to listen, and by the same token, other people are prepared to listen to you. And so if there's anything important that you feel that you need to express, then now might be the time to do it. And this moon sextile Mercury, it has an impact on your sign, well, for a number of reasons. I mean, Mercury is of course the ruler of Virgo. That's one thing. And additionally, the Mercury moon midpoint is in Virgo, because you've got Mercury is in the sign before Virgo, the moon is in the sign after Virgo. So together, they have a real impact on your sign. And so, if there is something to be communicated, then now might be the time to do it. But the question is, what kind of things do you want to communicate? And there is a serious aspect to this moon Mercury. It may be that there are things of practical importance that you need to say, and other people haven't understood it, and so perhaps you would prefer to keep it to yourself. Maybe you're dealing with something you've been thinking about for a long time, and now is the time to be really very clear about it. And in the process, you might have to take some risks because not everyone can handle the message. And as far as other people are concerned, it's going to be quite clear that you have your own boundaries, and you don't want to get too close to anyone. You want to say what's on your mind. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to get really close to anyone. You want them to understand, and that is enough. And today is a day for getting people to understand. And sometimes if you want to get someone to understand, you actually don't want them to get too close to you. You want to be seen as an individual. You don't want to be running according to someone else's script. And so if you are very clear about what is important to you, I think that people will listen to you. And your ability to be serious and controlled is going to get stronger as the day unfolds. And this evening, if you're in the Americas, the moon moves into Scorpio, and moon moving into Scorpio does mean that you can sort of elevate the way you talk, and you can start to be quite emotional about what you say. Not emotional in a way that is crazy or out of control. It could just be about focused emotion, and as you start to move into Thursday. So overall, I'm not convinced that today is going to be necessarily super exciting. It's not that kind of day, but I think that there are things you can communicate, and you can communicate things on your terms. And you don't have to necessarily be too polite about it. If people understand, then it's job done, and you needn't worry too much if they don't appreciate your message. If a message has to be delivered, well, it has to be delivered, and that's the way it is. Libra. Venus is, of course, your ruler, and it is making an opposition to Pluto. So inevitably, you're going to feel this opposition between Venus and Pluto. I mean, I don't know at what level. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to relate to anything manifesting. It may be about your thoughts and your feelings, but it is still very much there. And perhaps with this Venus opposition Pluto, you should be taking yourself seriously. You are important, and it's easy to worry about what other people want, giving in to their demands. But this is not a time for Librans to be too accommodating. You have to think about what is important for you, and I think that this Venus opposition Pluto allows you to project a power and also a detachment that is going to be very obvious. And so as far as your credibility is concerned, and also the respect you get, I think today could be very good. And you are able to make it clear that detachment and distance do matter. You don't want to get too close to anyone, because you want to be in control. And Libra, you very much can be in control. And I think that this is what the Venus opposition Pluto is about. You take things seriously. You should be taking things seriously. And it is a time, Libra, when you need to think about what makes you different, what makes you special, and what abilities do you have which really are unique, and they can't be compromised. And Venus opposition Pluto is an uncompromising aspect. And so do put yourself first, and recognize that if you spend your time with other people, doing what other people say, following the crowd, that would be a waste. And it's all about what you want and what you need, and part of what you need is a certain level of detachment. But heliocentrically, when we looked at the heliocentric picture, we noticed that there was a conjunction between Venus and Mercury. So with that Venus-Mercury conjunction, there's no doubt that you can communicate, you can tell people what is important, and you can get them to understand that what you are doing really matters. Scorpio. There is a feeling, Scorpio, that you want to hold back for most of the day, perhaps all of the day, and it's a very Scorpio thing. There are things that are best kept to yourself, and you've been maybe ruminating on them, and you're just not ready to be forthcoming, and that is okay. Now, there might be a change this evening in the Americas, because if you're in the Americas, then this evening the moon moves into Scorpio, moves into your sign, and so with the moon moving into Scorpio, you may have a different view, and you may still be taking yourself very seriously, and you may be putting a fairly high premium on your own space, but still you are considering the world, other people. You've got something to give, you've got something to offer, and as you move into Thursday, when the moon really gathers strength in Scorpio, you'll start to see what is possible. But while the moon is in Libra, in late Libra, it just may feel, Scorpio, that there is really not a great deal that you can do, at least in a social sense. Now, would you be correct to have that view? Well, not necessarily, because one aspect we do have today is an opposition between Venus and Pluto, and you have to think about what Venus is all about. And I've talked about Venus in Leo, Venus in early Leo in the Scorpio horoscope, and I do think that Venus in early Leo relates to you being successful, and also being able to present a particular image, an image of someone who is powerful and perhaps attractive as well. And Venus opposition Pluto is really highlighting this. With Venus opposition Pluto, you can bring to bear the power of your personality, and it's like something that is being hidden, has been hidden. You can bring it out into the open without revealing anything, if that makes sense, because people don't know what the power is behind you, but they can certainly perceive that power, and that might be a very good way of using that Venus opposition Pluto, because I think it is an important aspect. And Venus opposition Pluto may say something about relationships. From a social point of view, from a relationship point of view, it is a good day, and it can be a good day, even though you have your reservations. I think you have, in fact, deep reservations. You don't necessarily want to interact, but if you do interact, if you make the effort to be with people, if you give people a chance, then I think that things can happen, and you may see another side to someone. Perhaps you're dealing with someone who you hadn't regarded as being serious, and perhaps with Venus opposition Pluto, you start to see a serious side to their personality. And I say serious in a favourable sense. I mean, you want things to be serious. You want people to be consistent, and if they make a promise, you want to be sure that they're going to actually honour that promise. And so, it is important, Scorpio, that you do give people a chance. And just because you want to sort of disappear, keep a low profile, doesn't necessarily mean that that is the right thing to do. Sagittarius. it's a day when many of the 12 signs have their doubts about other people, and they might sort of just prefer to be alone, or to be with people they know and trust. And Sagittarius, I think you do come into that category. I think that you do have doubts, and you're wondering whether it's really worth it, trying to get on with people. And the problem is, or maybe it's not a problem, but the problem is, the closer you get to someone, the more it becomes obvious that you don't want to be close to them. And so it could then be said, Sagittarius, that it might be best if you make an effort to keep your distance. Certainly keep your emotional distance. You don't want to reveal too much. You want to keep things at a fairly straightforward and civilized level, especially as the moon is in Libra. Moon in Libra, yeah, it's sociable. It enjoys people's company, but it doesn't want to give too much away. It wants to keep things at a level where things are sort of light and easy. And if you can do that, I think that is fine. And it's not just you that's going to be reserved. I think other people are fairly reserved as well. Now they may give the impression of being friendly, but they're only friendly up to a point. They don't want too much proximity. So if you're feeling reserved and other people are feeling reserved, well, that's great, because there's just a mutual understanding. You might feel that you have some obligation to be especially friendly or warm to another person, but it's your feeling. And it just might be that if you have a standoffish approach, it will be appreciated. The other person, whoever that other person is, they might actually be relieved. So that tells you something about today. And also today there is an opposition between Venus and Pluto, and that opposition between Venus and Pluto just tells you something about what people are like. And people are serious today, and there are things they want to keep. They do want to keep to themselves, and it's something that should just be respected. And all of this is completely in keeping with the fact that Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter is going to be in Cancer for a long time. Jupiter is your ruler. Because it's in Cancer, you are strongly placed. You are strongly placed in a way until June, because that's when Jupiter moves out of Cancer into Leo. And so perhaps today is a reminder of the importance of distinguishing yourself from other people and their chaos, and understanding the importance of your own emotions, and taking things seriously, more seriously than usual, in the Sagittarius world, because Sagittarius does have a reputation for being quite light-hearted and easy come, easy go. But maybe that's just a stereotypical view of Sagittarius, and so a serious approach works for you. And if you're serious, then I think that today should really be pretty satisfactory. Capricorn. The moon is still in Libra, and because the moon is in Libra, you're perhaps inclined to think about what needs to be done. And there are things that need to be done, and you haven't got perhaps all the time in the world to do them. So go about your business, and don't be distracted. And additionally, Capricorn, remember that things can just happen. Don't assume that everything will work according to a particular plan. Sometimes there are events which no one had considered, and these events have the capacity to be incredibly disruptive. So this means that it would be best today that you have a standby plan, and that you're able to keep your cool if things do go wrong. And when I say go wrong, it might seem on the surface that they're going wrong, but they might not be going wrong at all. It's just that they're behaving in a strange way. And so if you have the ability to sort of move with the tide, then you should be okay. And additionally, we do have a sextile between the moon and Mercury, and this moon Mercury sextile gives you the ability perhaps to predict what's going to happen next. So if something happens today that seems unusual, at some level you knew it was going to happen, and so perhaps you should start the day thinking about everything that could happen. And don't think that something is completely unlikely, it can't happen. Well, it can happen. And so by being ready and by anticipating things, Capricorn, I think that you will be really helping yourself out, and perhaps you'll be giving yourself something of an advantage. And as far as people are concerned, they do matter. You have to encounter people, like it or not, but you're capable of being assertive, dynamic, and it's important that you're the one that takes the first initiative. And don't wait for someone to have an idea. Perhaps you should be the one to come up with the idea or the suggestion. So that is especially the case if you're in a discussion, if you're in a committee. Don't just let other people have their say. If you're discussing something, make sure you are the first person to speak, the first person to make a suggestion, and that way you will stay in control. And because you're the first person to make a suggestion, it's very likely that your suggestion will win through. So if you're involved in groups or committees, I think, Capricorn, you can be very effective. Aquarius. Today there is an opposition aspect between Venus and Pluto, and this Venus-Pluto aspect is likely to affect you. And the reason is you've got Pluto in early Aquarius, and your sign, and then Venus has just entered Leo, and then Venus makes this opposition with Pluto. So this Venus-Pluto opposition is hitting an important part of your chart. And so how do we understand this Venus-Pluto opposition? Well, firstly, there is Pluto. Pluto is in Aquarius. Pluto, in your star sign. What is it about? How have you been dealing with Pluto in Aquarius? It's been there since November of last year. And with Pluto in Aquarius, it is about you, and it's about how you present yourself. And it could well be about your own power. And it could just be a time when Aquarians need to be aware of what they can do, because at some level, Aquarius, you are very much in tune with what's going on around us, and some very Aquarian things are happening relating to technology and freedom. And you may be feeling this in your relationship towards technology, and how much freedom you have. And being an Aquarius, usually your freedom is important, but now with Pluto in Aquarius, it's perhaps even more important than usual. And so then we have Venus making an opposition to Pluto. Venus being in your opposite sign of Leo. And so Venus might represent another person or some outside force, real or imagined, that you might think is a threat. What could hold you up? What could prevent you from expressing yourself, and you're perhaps feeling that you have to do something about it, and you might be quick to perceive threats. So if anything or anybody seems to be compromising your freedom, you might want to react quickly. And I'm not saying you should react quickly. And I think that it's important that you try to understand what's going on, because you could argue that this Venus opposition Pluto as an aspect is quite psychological. It is talking about, your imagination, yes. If you're into sort of Jungian psychology, it might be about the shadow, things that are you, that are part of you, but which you're not accepting, that you're pushing out onto the outside world, and you see another person as a threat. They're not really a threat, and what you're really responding to is something within yourself, within your own psychology. So it's important, Aquarius, that you're very open and honest with yourself to begin with. Consider how you might distort the facts, distort the inputs. So you have these cognitions about what's going on around you, and you might be quick to jump to conclusions, but it's not necessarily the case. But Venus opposition Pluto, if we look at it in the most sort of straightforward way, that probably is how sort of most astrologers would look at it, especially if they were doing 12-sign forecasts, they would say that Venus opposition Pluto from an Aquarian viewpoint is about relationships and what kind of relationship you're in, and the issues of power and control could be very important. And you are capable of being very controlling if you want to be with this Pluto in Aquarius. And perhaps one reason why you might feel you have to be controlling is because if you don't control someone, then they're going to control you. And so it might feel that there is a battle for control. And so that's one way of looking at it. But Venus opposition Pluto can be quite obsessive and possessive. And so who is being possessive about what? And so that's a way in which Venus opposition Pluto could work. And it may not be about just a relationship. It could be about money, for example. Venus is a planet that's often related to money, and there's also, with Venus opposition Pluto, there could be sort of jealousies flying around, people being jealous about who has what, who owns what, and so that is a way in which the Venus Pluto opposition could work. I'm not saying that the Venus opposition Pluto need be a bad aspect, but on your part it does require a certain amount of honesty, particularly psychological honesty. And looking at other things, Moon is in late Libra, and it's getting ready to move into Scorpio. This evening, the Moon, if you're in the Americas, the Moon actually does move into Scorpio, and with the Moon moving into Scorpio this evening, the emphasis might change. You might start to think about what you need to do, what you need to get off the ground. And certainly by tomorrow, by Thursday, with the Moon in Scorpio, regardless of where you are, Aquarians are going to be starting to think about what they need to do and what they need to accomplish. And you might be thinking, well, August is nearly over. You've got to get going on things. So that is a way in which that can work. So Aquarius, it could be a complicated day, but I don't think that it need be a bad day. I think it can be very useful, but you've just got to be really honest with yourself. Pisces, there is at the moment not a great deal going on. I mean, I wouldn't have said that astrologically it's like it's super active, and I looked at what are the main aspects today, and there are only a couple of aspects. So maybe, Pisces, it will be a day when really not a great deal happens, and that might mean that you have a lot of freedom. So that is one way of looking at it. Though, Pisces, for much of a day, there will be things that you do want to keep to yourself. I don't think you want to be unnecessarily open. I mean, you might like to be open and honest, but I don't think that's going to work I think it's better, if you sort of bide your time, listen to your feelings, and if there's something that you're sort of uncomfortable with, just do stay away from it. And additionally, other people might be disappointing, and you might feel that people are just not prepared to give much away, and you, I don't think, are prepared to give much away. And so from an emotional viewpoint, there may be an emptiness there. People just don't want to get close to one another, and don't worry about it. It's just the way it is. And so perhaps you should be thinking about what you should be doing, what you would like to be doing, and if you want to do something serious, and it's important, but it's something you want to do, perhaps you've been delaying it, but now might be the time to just get on with it, and not worry too much what other people are doing, what other people are saying. And remember, the North Node is in Pisces, it's in your sign, and so it is a time in general, Pisces, for you to be doing things in your own way, and not to be worrying too much about what other people are doing. It really is all rather unnecessary. So Pisces, I would suggest that today, Wednesday, you don't worry too much about the astrology. You just you make your own choices, and you can cover quite a lot of ground, not in a way that is spectacular, but you just do it in a solid, low profile kind of way, and you are going to then be able to stay out of trouble. And as far as tomorrow is concerned, well, I think you're going to be well prepared for what is going to be happening tomorrow, and I think tomorrow is going to be more interesting than today, because tomorrow the moon will be in Scorpio. That will be of course, the moon in the water sign. You're a water sign, so I think that tomorrow should be better than today, and perhaps there'll be more opportunities. But I can talk about that in my next video. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 5, which is waiting. So we get this idea with waiting that we are just waiting to do something. We know that there is something we have to do, but we're not ready to do it yet. That is at least one view. There is an alternative view that this hexagram is about having to take the plunge. We don't want to necessarily take the plunge. We would rather wait by the river and not do anything. But at some stage, we have to. And we can't hold off forever. Now, I am absolutely not advocating that you go swimming in rivers. Just remember, I'm looking at rivers in a sort of fairly metaphorical way. And there is a question about how do we approach this, and what are we doing about it? And we do have two moving lines, the second line and the top line moving. And the second line talks about sand. And so what does that mean? Well, one way of looking at sand is that sand is something you see by the banks of a river, and the sand might be wet, but it's not the river itself. And so we're getting close to the action. And the action might seem a bit dangerous, and we can feel ourselves getting the sand on our skin, and this sort of damp sand, and it's slightly worrying because we're getting close to the water, but it shouldn't be, too much of a problem. We can deal with the sand. It's not like we're up to our neck in a river. It's not quite like that. And at the same time, the sand is associated with gossip and rumours, and so we may be waiting, and we may be worrying, what people are saying, and perhaps we feel that our reputation is being undermined by bad words happening behind the scenes. So that might be something we think about, but don't worry about it. The I Ching is clear that it's just rumors, it's just words, people saying stuff that they shouldn't be saying. It's not going to affect us, it's not going to stick. Sand can be brushed off, and so other people can be brushed off. And so one of the themes in my sort of forecast of the 12 signs is distance, and that we do need a bit of distance from other people, and perhaps this is reflected in the I Ching as well. And remember, one of the big aspects today is Venus opposition Pluto. We are wary of other people, and we're afraid of other people. What can people do? They might talk about us behind our backs. They might do all sorts of stuff, but don't worry about it too much, and it'll be fine. And then the sixth line moves, and I think we had the sixth line quite recently, and the sixth line of this hexagram can be seen as falling into a pit and feeling oneself to be stuck. I mean, it's not that one is literally going to fall into a pit, but one is just in a bad position, or one regards oneself as being in a bad position, and one can't do anything. And the I Ching is then telling us that help is at hand, that it talks about 3 guests, 3 people turn up, and we have our suspicions. There's a lot of suspicion around today. Venus is opposition Pluto. And so people are suspicious, so we're suspicious, but that doesn't mean to say that these people can't be our friends. They can help us out. So we shouldn't feel too stuck, because we are able to get out of this pit, but we might need outside assistance. Now, there is another way of looking at these 3 guests. It might be that we don't want to do anything. We really don't. We want to stay where we are, and then we find that the world comes to us. People say, "What are you doing? Why aren't you out there? Why aren't you doing something? What are you waiting for?" And so there could, in the end, be pressure on you to actually get yourself together, to sort of move, and perhaps to cross the river, and that might not be sort of what you want. I mean, if you look at it from a worst case scenario, I mean, I'm sure no one watches my video from the Ukraine, but if for example, you're worried about being mobilized into the army, and you're eligible for mobilization, you could say that you don't want to do anything, and then these people start sort of knocking on your door saying, "Where are you? You've got to fight." And that's kind of not what you want. So perhaps you should make yourself scarce in that situation, but I'm sure that's not going to be happening. And as I said, I don't think many people or anyone watches this video from the Ukraine. But it just so happens, if you're worried about mobilization, or if you're worried about being press ganged or being forced to do something against your will, then in that case, then keep a low profile. Make yourself scarce. Run. And so that's the 2 moving lines. So this does move, and this hexagram moves to hexagram number 37, which is the family, and a very different energy here. The family is telling us, it's saying something about what we regard as being secure. It's our grouping. It's our clan. That's a way of looking at it. And so perhaps the initiative that we're putting off, that we're waiting for, does relate to getting in touch with people we know, moving towards the center of a family. Maybe we just don't want to be part of something, and we've put it on hold. We want to be independent, but the family beckons, and so perhaps this is what it's all about. What action do we need to take to get close to the people who we belong with. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, and it's not necessarily about the literal family. It just could be about a group that we should be part of, and it's a group, perhaps, if we think about the last line of the previous hexagram of waiting, these three people turning up, whoever these three people are, that might be the beginning of something. It may not just be about three people, random people. It might be three people who we belong to, and perhaps in the end, today we have a realization that there is a group that we should be part of, and that perhaps that's where we should be taking the initiative. And I want to finish with the rather difficult task of looking at Moldova. And, Moldova has its Independence Day on the 27th, which is today. It's the 34th anniversary of Moldova's independence. So Moldova, at the moment, you could say is an important country because it is close to Ukraine, it's next to Ukraine, it wants to be a member of the European Union, and the European Union wants Moldova, I think, to be a member of the European Union, and there's a lot of pressure on Moldova, and its president is very pro-European. She, as a graduate of the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and she has been an advisor to the World Bank or an advisor to some important official in the World Bank. So, you get the picture of, who the president of Moldova is. That's Maia Sangu, and I'll be looking at her chart in a moment. So here is, let's see, here is the chart for, where's it gone? Here's the chart for Moldova. I don't have a time of birth for Moldova. Or rather a time where it declared its independence. Perhaps I should have tried harder. I maybe should have waited, but I couldn't get the information. But I had to put up something, so I've gone for noon. So I think it's reasonable to think that Moldova declared its independence within a few hours of noon. So here is a chart for Moldova, and there are some really quite interesting points about Moldova. I mean, particularly in terms of what is happening now. Well, firstly, Ukraine declared its independence on August 24th, 1991. Moldova declared its independence 3 days later, on August 27th, 1991. So you can see how tied up Ukraine and Moldova actually are. And so, Ukraine has got its sun at 1 degree Virgo or 0 degrees Virgo. Moldova has got its sun at 3 degrees Virgo. So we shouldn't forget that there was a new moon a few days ago at what was it, 0 degrees 23 Virgo. So I think that new moon is likely to have an impact on Moldova. Additionally, Moldova has an opposition aspect between the moon and Mars. Again, we don't know where exactly the moon is because I don't know its time, the actual moment that independence was declared. But I think it's reasonable to assume that there is a pretty close Moon-Mars opposition there. I mean, I did see someone put up a chart for Moldova where independence was declared, I think, at 4 minutes to midday, but I couldn't find any confirmation for that, so that's why I'm taking noon. But I think that Moon-Mars opposition is probably very important to Moldova, and Moldova has been in wars. It fought a war against Transnistria. I mean, there was a part of it actually fought a war against Russia and Ukraine. I'll talk about Transnistria in a moment, but Transnistria is a sort of a kind of a breakaway republic which isn't recognized, and it's in Moldova, and there are Russian troops in this place, and there have been Russian troops in there since the early 90s, and there are all these questions about what is going on with Transnistria. Is Ukraine going to try to invade that Transnistria? So there's all sorts of stuff going on. But it is kind of interesting that Russia and Ukraine came together to fight Moldova and I think Romania for Transnistria. That was a long time ago. But it does show perhaps the underlying conflict in this country. And as with Ukraine, we've got quite a few planets in Leo, and we've got a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, so you can see the power of that declaration of independence, Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Leo. And you could say that a country having a Venus-Jupiter conjunction is fortunate, it's lucky. But how's that working out? Ukraine has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Leo. It hasn't worked. I mean, regardless of what happens in this war that Ukraine has been fighting with Russia, the Ukraine project, as an independent country, it has been a disaster. You can blame it on other people, but the country has not done well economically. It's faced conflict. It's faced civil strife. It has not really worked out well. And you might say the same for Moldova. I mean, it's a poor country. And it's not part of the European Union, and it's sort of very marginalised. It might feel that it's coming back into the European centre if it becomes part of the European Union. But I think this does raise questions about Venus-Jupiter conjunctions and whether Venus-Jupiter conjunctions help. I mean, it's if you're choosing the timing of a project, you might think, you've got to have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. But I think the problem might be that it's in Leo, even though it's conjunct Regulus. Venus-Jupiter conjunct Regulus, you'd expect that to be wonderful, but I don't think it's working, and it just may be that Leo is creating the problem. Venus, particularly Venus in Leo doesn't necessarily work, especially well. Though there is a Sun-Mercury mutual reception, Sun in Virgo, Mercury in Leo, so the Sun and Mercury in each other's signs. Again, that should be quite good, but again, it's not necessarily been a great for Moldova. Definitely not. So things are starting to happen, because we've had this new moon on Moldova's sun, and I think that is perhaps saying something about Moldova's future. And also Uranus. Uranus is now in Aquarius. That new moon was on a few days ago was 0 degrees Virgo, square Uranus in Gemini. That may really stir things up, not just now, but in the future. Because what happens with Uranus is going to go retrograde soon. Uranus goes as far as, I think it's 1 degree on around September the 6th. Uranus gets to 1 degree 28 Gemini. Then it goes retrograde, and it's not until late April of next year that Uranus goes back into Gemini, having had a lengthy period in Taurus. And then June of next year, I think that Moldova will have Uranus square its sun. So I'm starting to think that next year could be really difficult for Moldova, and quite likely that's going to have something to do with the war in Ukraine. And more of that later. There are other charts to consider, and so with Moldova, another thing about Moldova that we should be concerned about is Saturn. So Saturn is retrograde, and Saturn will go back into will go back into Virgo. And so, sorry, go back, yeah, is that right? Saturn will go back into Pisces, sorry. And so what that means is that Saturn is going to make a conjunction to Moldova's moon, and it's going to make an opposition to its Mars. And we will start to see that by the autumn. And Saturn goes, when does Saturn go stationary? I mean, it goes stationary at around, beginning of next year at around 25 Pisces. So Saturn is going to be really chewing up that Moon-Mars opposition, late this year and into next year. So that's going to be difficult for Moldova. It's also going to be difficult for Moldova, the fact that next year it's going to have Uranus square its Sun. I mean, it's already getting Uranus square Sun. So we should be thinking about Moldova and thinking about how Moldova is going to be, impacted by the war in Ukraine, and how the war in Ukraine, might spread. At the moment it's contained to the east of Ukraine, but maybe there are other things going on. And don't forget that with Transnistria, we've got Russian troops kind of on Moldovan territory. So that's Moldova, and we have to think about the woman who is president. And the president of Moldova is Maia Sangu. Now, Maia Sangu, don't have a time of birth for her. And you notice that I've said that on this chart I've got her birthplace as Chisinau. She wasn't born in Chisinau, but I couldn't find on the atlas of my astrology program the village where she was born. But because I don't have a time of birth for Maia Sangu, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where in Moldova I choose, because I'm just taking the noon positions of her chart. And so Maia Sangu, as I've just said, she is very pro-European. She was described, I think RT described her as the European Union's favourite dictator. And I'm not saying she is a dictator, but she does show certain dictatorial tendencies, like arresting members of the opposition. That's not what you'd expect in a democracy. And so I'm thinking that a lot of pressure is being put on the democratic process by Maia Sangu and her backers. And of course, she is Europe's candidate. She's there to serve Europe's purposes, Europe and NATO's purposes. So you could say that she's a willing stooge, and she has an opposition aspect between Mars and Jupiter. You see, she's got Venus-Mars conjunction opposition Jupiter. Now, that Venus-Mars conjunction can be very charismatic. It's a good thing to have in a politician up to a point. I think when you've got Venus-Mars, as I like to say about Venus-Mars, yes, it is an attractive combination. It can make you attractive to a certain group of people, but other people can't stand you, and that's a problem of Venus-Mars. It can be quite divisive, and I think that that's perhaps what's happening with Maia Sangu. I mean, I think that her popularity ratings have dived recently, so she's not as popular as she used to be. But that Venus-Mars conjunction is opposition Jupiter. And she's got a very close Mars-Jupiter opposition. So Mars-Jupiter opposition might represent someone who is very active, who's got a huge amount of energy, and she certainly has. I mean, she's done all sorts of stuff, and she's very much in the forefront of a particular view. Jupiter in Capricorn, though. I mean, Jupiter in Capricorn likes to look after itself. It's not a great place for Jupiter. So she's got her own agenda, and so that's. But that's how Jupiter is the Jupiter and Mars opposition. It's there, and it's going to become more important because next year. When Neptune, of course, Saturn and Neptune, they will go retrograde, and they will go back into they will go back into Pisces. But then next year, Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and she's going to have Saturn opposition, Saturn square Venus, Saturn square Mars, Saturn square Jupiter. So next year does look particularly tough for her. And additionally, look at her sun. Her sun at noon is at 3 degrees 17 Gemini. So going back to Moldova's chart, Moldova has its sun at 3 degrees 36 Virgo. So her Gemini sun is exactly square Moldova's sun in Virgo. So that means that next year, when Uranus goes into Gemini, I think it's theoretically, I think it's in June. Moldova will have Uranus. Moldova will have Uranus square its sun. Maia Sangu will have Uranus conjunct her sun. So that's really bringing things together. Things are really sort of coming to a head at the moment with Moldova. And Maia Sangu, so she's born May the 24th. That means that she's she's had a solar return. Let's have a look at Maia Sangu's solar return for 2025, and that will also give us some hints about the various transits she's got. So, in her solar return, she has got a Mercury-Uranus conjunction. So things are really happening for her, for good or bad. And she's got her sun at 3 degrees Gemini. Now, so that's Maia Sangu, and we'll come back to her chart, and then there is she's going to have to face some elections soon. So not presidential elections, I think they're parliamentary elections. And so if we look at the parliamentary elections, I believe are on the September the 28th. And additionally, we have, so that's the 28th, that's going to be just after the autumnal equinox. So here is the autumnal equinox set for Chisinau, which is the Moldovan capital. And so this equinox is quite dramatic, because we have Uranus exactly on the ascendant, and we have Pluto exactly on the midheaven. If we set the equinox for Chisinau, let me see if I can get a map of Moldova to show you what I mean. I don't know whether I assume this program has a Moldova. Yeah, it does. So here is a map of Moldova, and we'll just have a look at how the equinox hits Moldova. And so there is Moldova. There's Chisinau. So at the time of the equinox, Uranus very close to the capital. Pluto not quite so close, but it's a small country. So I think that the equinox just before the election, this might indicate that the elections themselves are quite dramatic. But is that necessarily the case? Is that really going to happen? Well, difficult to say. But September the 28th, I assumed that polls open at 7 a.m. I looked it up, and I think someone said 7 a.m. for when the polls are opening. And so as far as what we have, of course, we have Uranus at 1 degree 16. So this Uranus, of course, is it is a time when it is getting close to Maia Sangu's sun. But I do think that the real drama for Maia Sangu is probably going to be next year, rather than this year. And the thing about Moldova is that we see this constant theme here of 3 degrees mutable with Maia Sangu and with Moldova. And so we know that Moldova has its sun at 3 degrees Virgo. Maia Sangu has her sun at 3 degrees Gemini. So that's the first thing to point out. Another thing about Maia Sangu is that she has a Sun-Neptune opposition at exactly 3 degrees, or 4, she's got Neptune at 4 degrees Sagittarius. She's got the Sun at 3 degrees Sagittarius, and she might come over, at least from a sort of a pro-Western perspective, as someone who's very sensible, and she's going to do what Europe says. But that Sun-Neptune opposition suggests that she might, in certain situations, be deluding herself. She might not necessarily know what's going on. I mean, she thinks she knows what's going on. She might have been to the Kennedy School for Government and have been an advisor to the World Bank and all of that kind of thing. But Sun-Neptune opposition, that does represent a key vulnerability. And I think that vulnerability may manifest next year when Uranus is conjunct her Sun, is opposition her Neptune. And one thing about Maia Sangu is that she has been part of a government that has been sending opposition leaders to prison. Now, when you send an opposition leader to prison, they always come up with some good reason for it, but it doesn't look good. It is not good optics. And one opposition leader who has been sent to prison is a woman called Evgenia Gutul. Again, I don't know very much about her, and she was elected as governor of a region in Moldova called Gagauzin, and they speak a language which is different. It's the Turkic language, and she apparently gets quite a lot of support from Russia, and she gets quite a lot of support from Turkey, and she was sent to prison for 7 years for receiving money, not declaring funds from Russia. I mean, okay, perhaps she should have declared her funds from Russia, but sending her to prison for 7 years seems a bit extreme, and there are other members of her party who I think have been sent to prison. And so, this is the kind of country that Moldova is. And Evgenia Gutul, born September the 5th, 1986, is interesting that she has her Saturn at 3 degrees Sagittarius, and this might indicate that Sandu might have to be careful, because Gutul's Saturn is exactly opposition Maia Sangu's Sun. It's also exactly conjunct Maia Sangu's Neptune, and so next year we have Uranus making an opposition to Evgenia Gutul's Saturn. We have Uranus making a square to Moldova's Virgo Sun, and we have Uranus making a conjunction to Maia Sangu's Gemini Sun, plus making an opposition to her Sagittarius Neptune. So, which makes me think that, next year Moldova could be under a huge amount of pressure, and I think that Maia Sangu, she might do okay in the elections. I don't know. I am not making any predictions about the Moldovan elections. I don't really have enough to go on, but I do think that Moldova is going to be in the news. Maybe not now, but I think that by next summer of 2026, we're going to be hearing a lot more about this country. So that's all I'm going to say about Moldova. I perhaps need to think about the subject a bit more. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.